When students at UC Santa Barbara revived the school's football program as a club team in 1983, all they wanted to do was play football. And they got to do just that after more than a decade of not having a team. The issue for the Gauchos is that over the course of a few seasons, they would go from being a club team to being too good for their own classification to eventually not being big enough. 20 years after pulling the plug on their first stint in college football, the reboot would suffer the exact same fate. Dusting off football at Santa Barbara was done so with good intentions and student support, but would ultimately lead to the most unfortunate revival in college football. The team was undone by something not of its own doing. I'm Cheyenne Hollis, this is the Touchback, and since we're talking about Santa Barbara today, that means I get to drop a Toad the Wet Sprocket soundbite. Awesome. Not only was Toad the Wet Sprocket formed in Santa Barbara, but a lot of their songs could be used to describe UCSB's football program. All I Want, Something's Always Wrong, that is the Gauchos football team in a nutshell. We begin in 1971 after an ill-fated stint in the university division, which was college football's highest classification at that point in history. Santa Barbara would axe its football program. Performances on the field had declined, with the jumping competition leading to some pretty embarrassing blowouts. Spending money on this was simply not seen as a priority for the university. School officials claimed the move was made for financial reasons. However, you'll also read some murmurings about how the school wanted to distance itself from a football team that could be seen as part of the establishment, quote unquote. The campus had some rather large anti-Vietnam protests around 71, 72, and some at the school just wanted to avoid the football team being used in one way or the other. How or why they thought that was the case, I'm not really sure, but this is also something that comes up when Sonoma State would drop its football program around the same time. Whatever the case may be, the Gauchos were dormant between 1972 and 1982. Then, in 1983, a bunch of students got together and decided they were going to form a club team. There were not a lot of college football club teams in and around California at this time, so UC Santa Barbara also scheduled NAIA schools as well as some Division III programs that were just within traveling distance in Southern California. That brings us to 1985. After a few years of having a club team, those involved with it began harboring ambitions to return to the NCAA ranks, this time in Division III. Those involved asked students to increase fees by $1.50 per quarter or $4.50 annually, with this money being used for the football program. It was approved and the Gauchos were back, baby! This also sets up a key trend we see later on in the story. School officials put the onus on students to keep the team alive. They really had no desire to be involved. I mean, they had no issues organizing it, sponsoring it, making it part of the athletic department. That wasn't the issue. But as far as diverting school resources into the football program, that was a non-starter for them. In 1986, UC Santa Barbara became a full-fledged Division III playing football school, although most of those club players were kicked to the curb. In fact, only 12 or so players from the 1985 club team would make it onto the roster for the 1986 Division III side. With the Gauchos having a 70-plus man roster in 86, that's a bit unfortunate, maybe even unfair to those club players, but I guess that's the nature of college athletics. There are a few things that should be noted as they will come up later on in the story. First, Santa Barbara was a Division III football independent, and it also kept all of its other sports in Division I. So basketball, water polo, soccer, all of that remained Division I, but football is in Division III. Second, the school did not award football scholarships, making it different from all of the other sports. This, by the way, is par for the course at the Division III level. Now, you may think that it would have been difficult for UC Santa Barbara to convince football players to come to the school, but let's be real, UC Santa Barbara always had a reputation as a great party school. Campus is pretty amazing, and really, who wouldn't want to be and live in Santa Barbara during their early 20s? This school certainly had advantages when it came to recruiting Division III kids. Simply being a UC school helped its cause. I mean, the only other options in SoCal around this time for Division III are all really expensive private schools. On the field, and the Gauchos experienced some transitional growing pains. They would go 4-5 during that initial campaign. However, they did record an impressive victory over NAIA Azusa Pacific, who started none other than Christian Okoye at running back. By the way, watching his highlights against the Gauchos defense during this game is like watching children trying to tackle a full-grown man. I honestly don't know how Azusa Pacific, the Cougars, did not win this game with Okoye, but they did not. 1987 saw UCSB finish with an impressive 8-2 record. Making it all the more impressive is that 2 of those wins came against Division II programs in the form of Sonoma State and St. Mary's. Despite seemingly being good enough to qualify for the Division III playoffs, the school was left out entirely. That was due to the fact that any school playing Division III football but with other sports at the Division I level were barred from the classifications, rankings, and playoffs because of the Dayton rule. Dayton, of course, being a Division I school that played Division III football and were probably too good. The rule came into effect in the 80s. That was after the 1980 Division III championship that would see Dayton win 63-0. Even if that rule doesn't exist and the Gauchos were eligible, they found it hard to meet the other requirement to be in the Division III playoffs, and that would be having 63% of your games against Division III schools. The other D3 sides in Southern California weren't particularly keen on playing them, apart from UC San Diego, which of course is a school that was in the exact same situation as UCSB with Division I sports that weren't football. Mostly though, Santa Barbara was scheduling NAIA schools or Division II schools, and they were holding their own. A major reason for this scheduling choice, by the way, is that the team just didn't want to travel across the country in search of other Division III programs to play. Simply playing these Division II schools in California, it was the easiest option, it was also the cheapest option, and it didn't really matter because Santa Barbara wasn't going to make the D3 playoffs whatever it did. Besides, when UC Santa Barbara did face off against a Division III school, they just absolutely waxed the floor with them. And that brings us to 1989. The Gauchos played 2 D3 sides. They crushed UC San Diego 51-3 and then obliterated Menlo 59-0. The competition just wasn't here for UC Santa Barbara. With little reason to stick around the D3 ranks, the school applied to move up to Division II ahead of the 1990 campaign. They would maintain their non-scholarship status but would be eligible for rankings and playoffs, as well as basically play the same teams that they have already been playing. It should also be noted before that happened, students approved another fee increase, this one being $1 a quarter or $4 annually, meaning their yearly contribution to the football team to support the football program was now $8.50 per year. The Gauchos would go 6-4 in their first season as a D2 independent. Originally, they had hoped that they would be able to join the Division II Northern California Athletic Conference, which they had ironically enough rejected in the 1940s, but these were all similar California schools, non-scholarship football playing programs. They felt this was a natural fit for them, but the conference just for whatever reason said no thank you. That, of course, saw Santa Barbara remain a Division II independent for the 1991 season. This is curious because they only played 8 games, the lowest total in all of Division II for that year. And they only managed to reach 8 games because they were able to schedule a home and away series with NAIA Azusa Pacific. It appears as if UCSB got burned by both Humboldt State and UC San Diego, essentially backing out of yearly home and away arrangements. Santa Barbara had traveled to both schools in 1990, but then in 1991, when they would supposedly have home games against both Humboldt and UC San Diego, they were nowhere to be found. Ultimately, the Gauchos would only have 3 home games in 1991, and the reported attendance for each one was under 1,000. Things were about to go from bad to worse, though. The NCAA was finally going to get serious about cracking down on Division I schools with football programs that were in Division II and Division III. All of those football playing schools were told they needed to be in compliance, and that meant having their football program in Division 1 or 1AA by 1993. This would impact California schools a great deal because the Golden State just had a lot of universities falling afoul of this rule, whether they were Division 1 for all other sports and then something else for football. I touch on this in an upcoming video and you'll learn more about it there. But long story short, a lot of schools were just scrambling in hopes of finding some sort of solution. The problem, of course, is that moving from Division 2 to Division 1AA was a huge financial burden. And to cover that burden, Santa Barbara once again asked students to vote on it. If they wanted to keep the football team around, if they wanted it to play Division 1AA, they would need to impose a $9 quarterly fee upon themselves. Essentially, they would be paying $36 more each year on top of the $850 already going towards the football program. The answer was no. The odd thing, though, is that the Gauchos could have still played 1992 as a Division II independent. Santa Clara was in the same boat as UCSB in that they weren't going to move to Division 1AA, but they still played out their 92 season as a Division II side anyway. It must be said the Broncos did have a conference to play in. Finding games for a lame duck Gauchos program already struggling to schedule games may have just been the straw that broke the camel's back. That really brought about a sad end to the football program's revival at Santa Barbara because it didn't really get a proper farewell or anything. The 1991 season ended. Students voted early on in 1992 to keep it alive. They did not. And then the program just sort of quietly disappears without a trace. No goodbye, none of that. It's just here today, gone tomorrow for Gauchos football. Yet the story isn't quite finished here. In 1992, the team's final quarterback, John Barnes, would walk on at UCLA. The Bruins quarterback room would suffer a litany of injuries, meaning Barnes was basically the last man standing ahead of a crucial rivalry game against crosstown rivals USC. The former Gaucho would play the game of his life as the Bruins upset the Trojans in a classic. Not bad for a guy whose team in Division II just stopped playing altogether. As for the Gauchos, their entire revival from basically 86 to becoming a Division III independent to the program's ending in 1991 is just really unfortunate. All they really wanted was a nice, modest football team. No scholarships. They didn't want to spend a ton of money. They just wanted to play football at a very, you would say, reasonable level. Quite frankly, they also went about it the right way, but the goalpost kept moving. First Division III boxed them out, then Division II was no longer viable. Eventually the students voted against the funding, but you can't really blame them. It's one thing handing over $8.50 a year to support the football team, but that was getting quadrupled overnight to have a Division 1AA program that they didn't really sign up for. The difference between 1AA Division 2 to most UC Santa Barbara students at that time would have been nominal. They wouldn't have known the difference. Yet, I don't know if anyone is to blame here per se. It's just a crappy confluence of events that cost UCSB its football team. And you know, that definitely sucks. You can also argue, though, that Santa Barbara doesn't really need a college football team. It's not a huge draw. Sure, they could have tried to gone the route UC San Diego did take and join the Pioneer Football League, the non-scholarship Division 1AA, or now FCS conference. But you also have to ask yourself, why? Students did not want to foot the bill for that. Diverting resources the school had away from other areas into a football program that the students had already said they didn't want to fund would just have been foolish. And really, there was just no return on investment here for anyone at UC Santa Barbara as it related to the football team. For a lot of people, it was just the opportunity to play the sport. And when costs just became astronomical and everything kept changing, you need to punt in life, and this was one of those times. UCSB had to punt on college football. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to learn more about the University of Washington's weird name history, including how they almost were never the Huskies, video upper right hand corner of your screen, and to understand my thoughts on what is the dumbest rivalry trophy in all of sports, video lower right hand corner. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out. to 25.